My name is Shalini. Welcome to another episode on the Let's Talk Wellness with Shal podcast. The vision of this podcast is to empower you with knowledge from my own experiences and my journey, along with global practitioners around the world. Today, I'm very excited to welcome Abha and for a very interesting topic on the science of healing, vagus nerve, anxiety, and mind-body wellness. Dr. Abha is an assistant professor of psychiatry and neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. She earned her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and completed her postdoctoral training at UCLA. Her research focuses on the brain-body mechanisms of fear, stress, anxiety, and the vagus nerve. Outside the lab, Dr. Abha is a whole body health enthusiast and a spiritual seeker. Rooted in yoga and Vedanta, she blends science and spirituality to explore human existence and deepen mind-body understanding. Born in Nepal, she is passionate about bridging scientific insight with spiritual wisdom to support holistic healing. Welcome, Abha.
Thank you so much, Shalini. It's such a pleasure to be in your podcast.
Thank you so much. I know we've been playing tag, and I'm so happy that you're actually here now with us. And where are you calling us from, Abha?
I'm from New York. Yeah, I'm so happy that we could finally meet, but I've been following your work, amazing work on bringing, healing in different ways to limelight. So yeah, it's such an honor and pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure New York is pretty cold, and you're getting to the holidays and the Christmas and New Year soon.
Yes, we actually got a big round of snow yesterday, so there's a lot of snow, but today there's like sunlight, so the
Oh,
it looks
great.
really bright and nice outside.
Awesome. Great. All right. So we'll get straight into the topic. Okay. So this is, for me, I think being doing yoga for a while and meditation and pranayama and all of it, obviously vagus nerve, anxiety, mind, body, all of these are like keywords in at least in my space, and I'm sure for the audience because I know a lot of them, are either yoga enthusiasts or they're in the journey or they're just figuring out all of this. So I'm very excited about this topic, and so we'll just go straight dive in. Actually, the first question I wanted to get to is the brain-body healing connection. But before I get there, I want to talk a bit about, Abha, like what was your journey like, right? I mean, how did this all begin in your life? And I don't know, how did this whole mind-body awareness come in?
Yeah, that's such a deep question, but also like I feel like a full circle moment, this journey itself. Now I look back because I moved to the US from Nepal for my higher studies, for my undergraduate after high school, and like a typical South Asian family, the goal was to either become an engineer or a doctor, and I was actually an electrical engineer major in my first year, and I was doing okay in calculus, but not so well in physics. And so I started exploring a lot of different other, things that I could do. And so I took biology, neuroscience, chemistry, all these like random courses, but not with a theme.
Experimented.
Yeah, exactly. And I think here you can be an undecided major too, right? And so I was actually, after my first year in physics, I was an undecided major, just trying out different things. And then I took this one neuroscience course and learned about the brain and mind. And I was taking psychology courses, also studying adult psychology, child psychology. And just this idea of understanding the mind really drew me. And the reason I say full circle is because my dad was a psychology professor in Nepal, and he's very well read in Vedanta. Like he knows the Upanishad, a lot of shlokas by hand, and he would use these at home. And I never like paid attention to them, thinking that's his thing, right? I never got into it, but once I got drawn to the mind. and pursued my path of undergraduate, then doing my neuroscience degree, PhD, studying stress. And I myself was going through a lot of stress of graduate school, handling a lot of things. And I needed actually these mind body practices, specifically the yoga practices, for my own stress management, right? And so I started doing very much like the typical asana practices and all. And then in my postdoc, the stressors grew more and more. It was hard to be a female, a scientist, handling my family dynamics and a lot of these things that were happening. And the philosophy of yoga and Vedanta really drew me. And I started having conversations with my dad himself about some of these things, and then also other friends and colleagues. And it really drew me. And the idea of understanding our selves through this brain body physical tangible way, but then also this intangible way, right, which science cannot measure through the tools we have, and the only way is through awareness itself. And every practice in the Vedantic or yogic is about going back to that awareness. And that's what my journey was. And then when I became a faculty at Mount Sinai and started my lab, I had this really burning passion to, of course, have my science out there in limelight, but also in the background, then to also bring this aspect of subjectivity, awareness into more light, right? Because that's what's not talked about in science. A lot of it is very tangible, measurable kind of things that we do in science. So I would say it started with my own journey in short, but then now I have felt like wanting to be this, I would say like a vessel to bring this aspect of knowledge from both angles, right, into sharing, just like you, right, like helping other people transform their lives, or at least be in touch with their own awareness that's always there. Yeah.
Wow. No, that's fascinating because I know, I mean, at least I read a lot about this, and I know I feel like each time I'm just at the tip of the iceberg because I feel like, oh my God, there's so much I don't know. So clearly you are, I mean, at least you've done your PhD. You're definitely way up there. I think I'm still like, at this very early stages of my learning, but I really wish I had more than 24 hours so that, outside of corporate, I can actually spend more time. But I think it's fascinating. I mean, just, even trying to learn about our mind, our brain, our body, I think there's so much, to just go and deep dive into this topic. So I'm very excited to, get straight to our discussion. But thank you. Thank you for sharing, because I'm always intrigued how people, kind of come into this, their research, or even just, the curiosity or learning, right? Because we all come from different places, and there's something that inspires us. There's a trigger, something that puts us on this path, right? So thank you. Thank you for sharing. And so, yeah, with that, we'll get into our topic. So the first question is about, brain-body healing connection, right? So you study fear, stress, anxiety, brain-body pathways behind them. So how do brain-body react during stress? And of course, as you know it right now, I mean, everybody is going through some form of stress. I mean, I'm, of course, talking about corporate and what's going on right now, but even outside of that, I think, everybody's in different phases of life, right? So there's definitely an element of stress, we go through, right? And so I would love to know, what does that mean for you? And then again, the stress and the healing intersection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a deep and important question in the age we're living in today, where it seems like stressors are everywhere, right? There's family related stressors, there is outside stressors, work stressors, and it seems like endless things that are always pulling us in many different directions. And this is such, it's an age-old question, but it's now even more relevant. But yeah, the brain body connection is really interesting because a lot of times in neuroscience in general, the brain has been given a lot of importance. And of course, the brain is important, right? It regulates our bodily function and it modulates, our actions and reactions that we take, not just in daily life, I would say in a moment by moment basis, right? And so one of the things about the brain that's sometimes described or or not always talked about is this way the brain predicts our behaviors, our responses based on incoming information. And this incoming information comes to the brain from our body itself, right? So our heart rate, our breathing, our gut function, our temperature, our pain, even any kind of environmental information or the sensory information are going into the brain, and then brain processes and takes that information and then decides what's the next right thing to do, right? And so in a stressful situation, which the mind now labels as stress, what happens is it is considering things that may be even neutral or not stressful, even that as stressful, and it's having the same responses of that fight or flight or freeze response is usually what it's described as, even in those situations, right? So when we were evolutionarily in any kind of danger or threatening situation, the body and brain have evolved in such a way that it either makes us fight that situation or flee from that situation or freeze in place, right? But it's been ingrained in our brain and body in such a way, now the threat doesn't even have to be present outside. The threat could be in our mind, right? We could feel threatened about a colleague doing better than us, right? Or something you would consider a neutral or a mild stimulus is causing our brain and body to have the same reactions. And so the thing is, the body is always talking to the brain and the brain is always talking to the body, right? It's a constant two-way communication that's happening all the time. But when the communication is from only the body saying this is threatening, so that means when we are in threatening or stressful conditions, when the heart rate is very high, when our breathing is very fast, then the brain is like, oh, this is stressful, and now it's going to react, right? So what the brain-body connection can also allow us to do, if you look at from beyond stress, is that now if we modulate our bodily function, so if we take a slow, deep breath, or we take a pause before we react, then the brain gets the signal, this is not stressful, right? This is not threatening, and it's not going to react the same way. And a lot of studies in neuroscience focused only on the top down, and most of research has focused on trying to change what the brain controls in regards to the body, but it hasn't paid as much attention to what's coming from the body to the brain, right? About these heart rate breathing. Now the field of interoception, which is basically how the brain listens to the body, is a growing field of study. And studies have found that even things like our immune functions, our gut functions, which a lot of ancient traditions had focused on, especially the gut function, can alter the brain too, right? So this two-way communication between brain and body is so crucial for us, but it's also, the positive thing is it's also something that's changeable, right? We can actually alter it volitionally or consciously, right? And so it's happening automatically, but if we bring the awareness into the picture, we can also take these moments to change how the communication is happening.
Wow. Yeah, that's really profound. I think I've never heard it, or at least somebody explain it that way. So that is very interesting, because I'm just thinking as you were talking, right? Even just in yoga, I mean, I'm sure you know, but in Patanjali's yoga definition as well, right? I was just thinking, we say it starts with asana, because again, there's the physical body, right? And then you're building on pranayama, meditation, all of that comes much later, right? But again, it all starts with your physical body, right? Because there is that connection. But I know you obviously talked about a little different angle, but I'm just trying to relate that in my head, why that physical body is that starting point for a lot of other things, right? Even as we go through this spiritual path or anything for that matter, right? But the physical body is kind of that, I would say, almost foundation or that baseline, right? Before you build on to other things. So it's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, just listening to you, and I was just trying to pivot that in my head, right? Why we keep saying that the physical body is important. Yes, even from a meditation perspective, because you need to be able to sit, right? Because you need a healthy physical body to be able to sit. But now you're talking about just even the connection, the thoughts, everything, right? It all starts with, and they say, right, again, your body manifests a lot of things sometimes, right? Because obviously if you're so stressed out, it's gonna like, I don't know, show up in some way, right? So clearly there is some connection there. So no, thank you. That was a great explanation. So I think I'll go to my next question, which is the vagus nerve. Again, I know this is a word that more recently I've heard it a lot from different folks. So I would love to know, I mean, obviously you do a lot of research and it's, really popular, like I said, in the wellness space. So can you actually explain a little bit about, what this is, what does the vagus nerve actually do and what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to relate to your previous question also, right? With the body and brain being important vessels, I would say, to express that awareness or consciousness, right? So in Patanjali's yoga also there is the 5 layers, or we can say in general, right? Like 5 layers of us. So the Annamaya Kosha or the food body is the main body that's described, but there's also the mental layer, the energetic layer, the wisdom body, and then as well as the consciousness that shines through all of them, right? And so this is why, like now, when we look at vagus nerve, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, which is part of this physical body, right? So the autonomic nervous system is like the word, it means automatic, right? Like it's happening itself. So our breathing, our heart rate, our gut functions, these are all autonomic nervous system functions. And the autonomic nervous system itself has 2 branches, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. They are like the yin and the yang. We can look at them that way. And the sympathetic nervous system is important, like I had described before. We actually, need the sympathetic nervous system to react to stressors, right? So if we are in danger, we need our sympathetic nervous system to increase our heart rate so we can move away from the danger, right? And whereas the parasympathetic nervous system, which is mainly regulated by the vagus nerve, which is basically this 10th cranial nerve that has connections between the brain and the body. So it's sending these neuronal projections into every single organ in our body. And interestingly, the vagus nerve, actually 85% of information it carries is from the body to the brain rather than from the brain to the body. So that also tells you, right, how much information going from the body is so important. But because vagus nerve is like this nerve, when it's activated, it puts a brake on the sympathetic nervous system, bringing us back into that homeostasis or equilibrium or balanced state. So yes, we need reaction, but we also have to come back to that balanced state, right? So that's why they're the yin and the yang. We need both of them. The focus in yogic teachings and practices have been so much on vagus nerve because it brings that state of balance and calm, right? But I do want to emphasize that we do need both of them. Like, for example, if you take a yoga practice, even an asana practice, let's say, and you are doing practices where you're doing downward facing dog or even any kind of headstand or any of these asana practices where the blood is flowing towards the heart and the heart rate increases, that's actually activating sympathetic nervous system. But the best aspect of any part of yogic practices is it also has the counter, which then activates the parasympathetic, right? So if you're in a child's pose, or if you are, sitting in just sukhasana or something, then you have now activated the parasympathetic nervous system. So within a practice, you have now tuned your sympathetic nervous system as well as the parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve. So I would say vagus nerve gets talked about a lot, the polyvagal theory gets talked about a lot, but those are not the only 2 systems, right? Because there's a lot more, like, for example, in the brain itself, this information then changes the way the neurons function. So there is neuroplasticity or changes in the structure of the neurons or functions of the neurons happening. So it's one part, I would say vagus nerve is one part of bringing this balance in our daily life, but there's also a lot more. But it plays a crucial role, right, in that sense. But I think we should pay attention to both of them, right, sympathetic or parasympathetic. And that happens even in pranayam practices, right? We could have like Pastrika breathing or, Kapalbhati, those kind of breathing practices which increase sympathetic or increase that heart rate. But then the Anulom Vilom or the alternate nostril breathing, Samavritti pranayam, all of them sort of bring back the parasympathetic activation, right? So they activate the vagus nerve, but again, we need both of them to be in balance. So I think
Exactly.
that's the key point. Hmm.
Yes, yes, absolutely. No, I think that's a great explanation. Also, I think like they say in the Hindu philosophy, right? There's the Shiva Shakti. So essentially, you have the masculine and the feminine energy, right, in the body. So you have to find that balance, right? So I think that's a great way to explain that. I know my next question was, can you explain parasympathetic and sympathetic balance, right? So maybe you can talk a bit. I know you already mentioned that in your previous conversation or connection with the vagus nerve, but just in case for listeners who are not aware, right? I mean, what is the sympathetic and the you know parasympathetic that we're talking about? Maybe you can just help with a high level kind of a definition.
Yeah. So basically, like I said, so sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system are two parts of the autonomic nervous system, and sympathetic nervous system is associated with release of neurochemical like adrenaline in the body or noradrenaline in the brain, which basically puts you in that state of being ready for any kind of challenge that may come your way, right? So that means increased heart rate, increased breathing, decrease in gut function. And so all of these that prepares your body basically for action, I would say, right? So that's the sympathetic nervous system, whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is what's described as the rest and digest system. So it prepares your body for rest and digest, right? So that means when it's activated, your heart rate goes down, your breathing goes down, but your gut function goes up, because to digest your food properly, you don't want to be in a stressed mode, right? That's why stress is associated with a lot of gut dysfunctions, right? IBS and others, because when you're constantly in stress, it affects, even that function. So basically, if we look at it that way, then parasympathetic nervous system puts a brake on the sympathetic nervous system, brings that calm and state of balance where a lot of the processes in our body can go back to, I would say, that normal state, right? And so that's also something that's happening, in our active, daily life, like running or swimming or dancing, versus if we are meditating, if we're staying, calm and taking a pause between two things we are doing, or even when we're sleeping, right? So if we look at it, it's happening automatically, but now with a conscious way of looking at sympathetic and parasympathetic, we can tune them in certain ways, right? With these yogic practices and others. So hopefully that helps in terms of understanding them as this yin and a yang, again, I want to say. Mhm.
Yes, yes. No, no, no. No, that's a really good explanation. I just wanted the audience to have a little more context, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
not sure how many of them would have heard about this, but I think, yeah, it's a great way to simplify this to say yin and yang, because you need both, right? So it's not like one exists or one is better than the other, but again, we need both parts of that, right? So no, thank you for that. So then I kind of go into the neuroscience of fear and trauma, right? Because your work investigates the amygdala circuits, the neuropeptides, and fear and anxiety. So what have we misunderstood about fear, and what do people need to know about how fear is stored and healed?
Yeah, again, very relevant question for today's, day and age we're living in. It seems to me that we are in a state of fear all the time, right? There's
Oh
so
yeah.
many threatening, news, there's threatening, situations that we're in. But okay, so if we look at fear itself, fear is that evolutionary preserved sort of emotional state that we have because we had to navigate the world through a lot of dangerous or threatening situations, right? So fear is basically a response that the body and brain has towards anything that feels threatening, in a general or simple way to describe it, right? And so, of course, fear itself, if we look at it, it's not only one part of the brain or one brain region. Of course, amygdala is the brain region that's very much correlated, its activity is correlated with these fight or flight or freeze responses, which are typically associated with fear. There's many different neurochemicals that are altered in the amygdala that has also been associated with these fear states. There are these proteins and neuropeptides, which are basically, bigger forms of these proteins, that are expressed in there. And there's a lot of pharmacological ways that researchers are targeting to dampen the amygdala activity through molecules or chemicals so that fear response can be decreased, right? So that's been going on for a long time. I would say more than 25 years or so of research has very well established that fear responses are regulated by the amygdala and also many other brain networks. But I think what we have misunderstood, and I'll say this even as a neuroscientist who has been studying fear and stress for a long time, is that fear and stress not only affects one brain region, it actually affects the whole brain and body. And I think a lot of ancient philosophies understood this very well, right? That, there are these connections between the brain and body, and after we alter our bodily functions, we can actually alter the whole brain, right? So I think the misunderstood part about fear and stress, because it's been associated so much with amygdala, is that yes, of course, amygdala is a brain region that regulates the fight or flight or freeze response, so of course its activity is correlated, but there's a lot more we have not completely understood. And in fact, fear has this very subjective component, right? It can be altered. Yes, we can all go through stressful, traumatic situations in our life, but also when we come to these practices, our perception of the fear can change through life, right? So something that felt very threatening, maybe when we were a child or in a certain situation, that perception can change over time, right? And so of course therapies like cognitive behavior therapy is based on this, right? You keep getting you expose someone to the similar kind of threatening situation, and over time you start to realize this is not threatening, and your fear response then starts going down. But the problem sometimes is when you're in a different situation and something reminds you of a traumatic or a threatening situation, that fear response can again come back. And so it points that there is so much more in regards to our awareness itself that we can bring into play to actually see threatening situations in a different light, right? It doesn't mean that we can control what's outside, because threats will keep arising, right? But what we can control is our response to the threat. And that can be a little pause, right? Or it could be even after we've had an emotional response to any kind of threat, we can have contemplation or looking at, was that necessary? Was this something that was real? Or was it a story created by my mind, right? So I think those kind of appraisal practices are what's a lot of times sometimes can be missing if we only focus on trying to reduce the activity of the amygdala, right? So I would say the important thing about fear and trauma and stress research is, I think there's one piece where we can approach it through this body or this brain in a tangible way, but then there's also this whole intangible way, at least through science, where we can constantly alter our perception, our awareness of that trauma or threat itself. So I think that those would be the sort of missing things, I would say.
Correct. Oh, wow. Okay. I feel like I can keep going. We keep talking about this. I mean, this is like, oh my gosh, super interesting. And, I think this again goes back to, reacting versus responding. So that, again, you're pausing, right, before you just jump to, reacting to any situation. And so I think, you just explained it so well. And so I'm sure there's a lot of double click in there that we can talk about. But I know, also, I guess in the interest of time here, so I'm going to try and, obviously, my next question is very interesting, and I think something I also wanted to know. Science meets spirituality, right? So you're a neuroscientist, you're also a spiritual seeker, you're rooted in yoga, Vedanta. So how do you integrate science, spirituality, and understanding healing, consciousness, and just well-being in general?
Yeah. Also, this has been a journey in the making. And, like you had said, I feel like even though I have the title of a neuroscientist, I feel like learning never stops, right? Like there's so much I also need to learn. And I don't, by any means, I don't feel like I know everything or I am the expert, right? I feel like I'm always learning. And especially in the path of science and spirituality, everything is evolving and everything becomes this process. So I feel like, like you were saying, in that sense, that it's a journey, right? But it's a journey in the sense that science and spirituality, what I have started to see, are not different from one another, right? So that's been my profound sort of revelation, is that I had kept them very separate. So in a scientific world, of course, science does not need spirituality and spirituality does not need science for what they are doing. But as humans, I think we need both of them, right? Because science allows us to have that logical, that questioning, that curiosity. And that's why I keep saying that everybody is born a scientist, right? We don't need degrees and all. We can be curious. Children are so curious. And that's a constant scientific process, right? To be curious about anything and anyone or any, part of our lives, to ask the question why this is happening, how this is happening. And that's the science, I will say. We can do small parts of that science and focus on, like I have focused on stress and, the biology of stress and all of that. But there's a lot of other aspects of science, also tangible science, right, that we don't know, and research is ongoing. And then spirituality pretty much asks the same question, right? Who am I? What am I made up of, right? What is the purpose in my life? But the method is different, right? Instead of tangible methods like microscope or, these tools that science has, the tool is inward, right? We can sit with our own mind. The mind itself is so vast, and we have now become scientists of our own mind in that sense, right? And so that's why it's not different. The tools may be different, but the questions are the same, and the way we navigate could be the same. And so in that sense, I will say science and spirituality are very much the same sort of processes that allows us to understand who we are, and in that process understand who others are. And it allows us to become, I think, for scientists to become more compassionate scientists, to be more aware scientists. I will even say more enlightened scientists, right? We need more enlightened scientists, not just scientists walking with their egos and saying, I am the one who solved this and I know everything. And so I think it's science and spirituality combination brings in humans, I think, that humbleness of understanding that I only know this much and there's so much to know. And so, yeah, that's what I will say. The navigating part now has been much easier because that's how I share this, through Sangha or through satsang and others, where I bring understanding of even our, Vedic shloks, or even like, right now we have this Sangha on Ashtavakra Gita that's happening, where we look at even awareness or consciousness itself from a scientific perspective and a spiritual perspective, and understand what we're missing, and how spirituality can complete those answers and things like that. Yeah, so it's been a journey in that way.
Nice. Yeah, I think, I just had a recent interview on Ikigai, which is again a Japanese concept, right, about well-being. And we touched on very similar things. And I was just thinking, right, regardless of the backgrounds and where we all come from, right, and he was talking about, again, the well-being and the purpose and finding fulfillment in life. And, I brought up, again, in India and South India, right, there is a saint called Ramana Maharshi who talked all about who am I. And so I could draw parallels as he was talking, because it's the same fundamental question. We're just coming at it from different angles and, our own experiences and journeys in life. But I think just kind of how you were explaining, right? There's this whole scientific side of it, there's the spiritual side of it. The fundamental question is still the same. I mean, all of us here, right? We're still exploring why we're here, what's our purpose, the whole who am I fundamental question. I think it's still so relevant, and it's just the different approaches and how we're looking at it, right? I think that's really what's different. But anyway, we're trying to solve the same thing. So, no, thank you for that. And so I think, okay, one last question. What if you had to leave the audience with any practical tool or, any quick guide or tips, what would that be?
Yeah, so two things that really have helped me, and I have also, through my practices shared with others that have helped others. And what I will say is sometimes, finding time to sit down for meditation or any practice for 30 minutes or 20 minutes itself can become a stressor, right? And so what I have really incorporated, and I think that really works, are these things called micro practices, right? So micro practices means you're not technically finding like, okay, I need to sit down for 20 minutes and then only I'm going to feel good. But it's a constant practice that you're doing any moment. Like, for example, after we end this meeting and when I go on to do something else, I will check in with myself, right? Like, what's my heart rate, right? What's my breathing like? And take a moment to either just close my eyes and take a little breather to bring everything back to normal before I go to do something else. So I'm not, like going between. So these transition times or these practices, if we spread out throughout the day into little chunks of like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or even when we're walking to the bathroom, just being aware of ourselves, right? Like, how am I feeling? All of that, just this dialogue we can have, which takes few seconds to just check and bring everything. So I think that's the key tool I want to leave with, is that if you can find time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, have that practice also. But that's not itself enough for you to navigate other things. So keep bringing these micro practices of awareness, I would say, throughout the day. And ultimately, from a brain's perspective too, it's a habit formation, right? Habit formation actually changes your brain's structure and function itself. And so neuroplasticity is the word that's commonly used also. But what it basically means, when you get into this habit of just being aware of yourself, your breath, your body, your mind, your thoughts, your energy, all of that, it becomes a habit. You don't have to force it, right? So I think those two are the things I will say, these micro practices of awareness constantly throughout the day. And I think being curious in that way also, right? Like, why am I feeling this way, rather than saying like, this person did this to me, So sort of, again, that contemplation awareness process or practice. Yeah. So that's what I would love to leave everyone with.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much information. I think this is an amazing conversation. I definitely feel like I want a session 2 on this, and maybe we go into very specific topics, because I feel like there's a lot to uncover, and it's very hard to kind of fit all of this in this short little, half-hour window. But I'm sure we'll have more conversations related to this topic. So thank you so much for taking this time. And I would love for you to share with the audience where they can reach out, where they can find you, or if they have more questions or they're curious, where do they reach out and find you?
Oh, thank you so much. I do want to say also thank you so much for inviting me. These conversations are ongoing conversations, and would love to, learn about your journey as well. And such an honor and pleasure again. In regards to where people can find me, so I have a website called neurochetana.com, neuro, and then Chetana, CHETANA.com, which I can share with you. And through that website, it's exactly like you had shared, Ramana Maharshi's, whose book I have also read, on that aspect of who am I, right? And I do have some offerings there that I have, like this ongoing Sangha on Saturdays at 11, where we all gather. And if you want to join that, you're welcome, anybody who wants to join that. And all that information is there. I'm on Instagram as NeuroBreathe. And then, of course, my lab and work at Mount Sinai. But if you feel like it, the best way to reach out would be through neurochetana.com. And then I can also share my email address as well if anybody has curious questions or wants to join or stay in touch. But thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and you have a lovely day, and thanks for being here and sharing all of this insightful, thoughts, pointers, all of it, and guiding us through this journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shalini. Have a great day.